this is a gentle rumination, I suppose, in many ways. I think I got some genuine reassurance from the train of thought that was sparked into being by a little snippet of news, archaeological news, a little shard, a little fragment of a Roman jar, some sort of ceramic object made by Romans during the Roman period. Almost certainly held olive oil. That was a big important commodity and a big staple of life in the Roman period. So it probably held olive oil, but whatever. At some point, it was broken or put aside. It was made and used in southern Spain, and it's if you work on Roman sites, medieval sites, you get barrow loads of pottery. Generally, because it's such a necessary of everyday life for everything, for cooking, for storing food and all the rest of it, for storing wine, for storing olive oil and everything else. And so a shard of pottery, so what? But this one has really caught people's imagination because it was quickly noticed by someone that it was covered in writing. I mean, someone had scratched into the clay. And even at that, that might have been overlooked because it was quite common actually. It's not every day, but it's not uncommon to find things scratched into ceramics about who made it and how much was in it, and sometimes like duty paid, taxes, very very practical bureaucratic stuff. You sometimes find, but someone noticed that there's a lot more than that going on, a lot more words, and basically it fell into the hands of someone who recognised it for what it was, which is some well-read individual had scratched into this bit of clay a quotation, a bit of literature, the work of the Roman poet Virgil. So bearing in mind that it's the kind of piece that could just so easily have been lost, just set aside, not properly noticed, but it happened to fall under the eye of a series of people that began to understand it for what it was. And one of the archaeologists got it into the hands of someone who could translate it, because it's in Latin, and it reads: "Earth once changed the acorn for the plump wheat ear, and mingled with the grape your newfound gift." Now, it was understood by a clever, archaeologically connected people that this is a direct quotation from the poet Virgil, and specifically it comes from a body of work of Virgil's called the Georgics, which are also called the Bucolics. It's poetry that takes part of its inspiration from agriculture, working the land, producing crops, looking after animals, and all of the hard work that involves. Hence the references within that line to the acorn and the plump wheat ear and the grape. Now, there's something beautiful anyway and ephemeral, I suppose, that someone, what was going through their minds, why did they do it? If we had the whole piece, how much other poetry had that person bothered to scratch into the surface of this vessel? So there are all those immediate and human considerations, but there's also something bigger about it, because when you consider what Virgil meant, a whole world opens up. Virgil is one of the most famous of all the Latin poets, of all the Roman poets, and as well as the body of work that is the Georgics, which is about things agricultural, he also wrote a body of work called the Eclogues, several separate pieces of poetry, and one of the Eclogues is Eclogue number 4, and Eclogue number 4 is of enormous significance because Virgil was writing, or he wrote Eclogue number 4 40 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. Okay, so Virgil lived and died in a world without Christianity or without knowledge of the birth of Jesus. But in Eclogue number 4, he seemed to predict, in the manner of a prophet, the coming of Jesus. The lines in question in Eclogue number 4 are: "Now the last age by Cumae Sibyl sung has come and gone, and the majestic roll of circling centuries begins anew. Justice returns old Saturn's reign, with a new breed of men sent down from heaven. Only do thou, at the boy's birth, in whom the iron shall cease, the golden age arise. Under thy guidance, whatso tracks remain of our old wickedness once done away, shall free the earth from never-ceasing fear. He shall receive the life of gods, and see heroes with gods commingling, and himself be seen of them, and with his father's worth reign over a world at peace." Now, unfamiliar language, but it's about the birth of a boy who will bring a golden age to the whole world, a world in which all evil and all bad thought and all bad deed are all gone, and the world freed from fear. All of it has subsequently been interpreted by Christians as meaning that Virgil could see it all coming. I mean, what is the story of Jesus if not the birth of a boy who grows to rule over a world at peace? A man who takes away wickedness from the world, who takes away sin, and it brings this golden age. Now, it's easy to see why Christians would interpret that as being a prefiguring, a foreshadowing of the Christian message in poetry written 40 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. And I think what's happening there, which appeals to me, is that, or it's people looking back in the way that we do on this podcast. The idea of being in a present, of being in a world that's difficult to understand, or a time that's difficult to understand, and looking back for glimpses and hints and clues that echo and that seem to rhyme with the present. People have always done that, and that we here in this podcast are just in a long tradition of thinking, I wonder if there have been glimpses of this before. I wonder if a version of what we're enduring and experiencing has been endured and experienced in the past. And we play the same game. There's definitely something potent about Virgil. Whether or not he really was a proto-Christian, whether in fact he really was someone that saw the Christian message before it was available in the manner of a prophet, that's difficult. But those lines scratched into that clay vessel are from the Georgics number 4. It's about looking after bees. It starts with all sorts of practical advice on how to build a hive, and where you should build a hive, and how you should take care of bees. But then as the poem develops, it also becomes a message. It's about lost love, and it carries with it a message that, in some respects, that hard work is its own reward. It's good for the soul, and that it's good for a person's well-being. It's kind of bound up in that idea of the pursuit of happiness, that idea that in order to be happy and fulfilled, rather than just seeking the things that make you happy, you ought to work hard at something that is of greater good, and that your collateral benefit will be your own share of happiness. And so there's something of that unfolds in Georgics 4. Someone writing subsequently observed and commented that there are only 4 things that survive the ravages of time. Gold doesn't corrode, sunlight is forever, amber continues to glow, and honey never turns. It remains edible forever, and it doesn't perish and doesn't diminish. And that in itself, I always find that commentary on Virgil's Georgics carries with it something reassuring, that there are certain elements, if you like, that prevail and that survive. And so I suppose when I read about that fragment of pottery, with some meaningful lines etched into it by someone whose motivations we cannot know, invites us to look back at the work of Virgil. And there is this message of the birth of something hopeful, the prediction of someone who has been born, who brings into the world a time of peace and an end of unhappiness. And I think that little fragment of history carries so much with it, which, well, it lifts my spirits.